They believed framing a black teenager would be simple, that no one influential would ever take notice. They overlooked one crucial detail. Her brother possessed the leverage to completely upend the entire courtroom. Ariel Porter never imagined a quick errand at a Tempe, Arizona strip mall could jeopardize her entire future. At 17, her aspirations were firmly set on UCLA, already accepted into their prestigious pre-law track. Her educators lauded her intellect, her track coach deemed her unstoppable, and her parents, both dedicated schoolteachers, couldn't have beamed with more pride. That Saturday afternoon was intended to be straightforward. Ariel needed a new backpack. Finals were a mere 2 weeks away and her old one had finally given out. She headed to a place dubbed Discount City. Not exactly upscale but convenient and affordable. She recalled her mother's half-jesting remark from that morning, "Don't squander a fortune, Ari." Inside, the store buzzed with activity. It was loud, with children darting between aisles and a cashier yelling for a price check. Ariel located a backpack quite swiftly, a plain navy blue one. As she joined the queue, she retrieved her phone, scrolling through messages. And then it happened. A man in a red polo shirt, whom she'd later identify as the store manager, tapped her shoulder. He instructed her to accompany him to the back room. Perplexed, Ariel inquired why. He claimed someone had reported her for concealing merchandise in her bag. Ariel stared, utterly flabbergasted. She hadn't even touched anything else in the store. They walked past staring customers, Ariel acutely aware of their gazes adhering to her, branding her guilty before she'd even had a chance to utter a word. In the cramped rear office, the manager ordered her to empty her pockets and backpack. Her hands trembling, she complied. The only items that tumbled out were her phone, wallet, lip balm, and the very backpack she intended to purchase, its security tag still attached. He appeared disappointed, as if he desperately wanted her to be culpable. Nevertheless, he declared he had no alternative but to contact the police, insisting it was company protocol. Ariel attempted to protest her innocence, but he remained deaf to her pleas. The arriving police officer was initially courteous. He even offered Ariel an apology as he fastened the handcuffs, explaining he was simply following procedure. She sat in the patrol car's back seat, feeling detached, as if observing someone else's reality. This wasn't meant to occur to young people like her, kids who meticulously followed the rules. Down at the precinct, they booked her for petty theft. Ariel repeatedly asserted it was a misunderstanding, but no one seemed genuinely interested. They provided her with a court date and released her hours later, her wrists still smarting from the restraints. That night, she wept silently into her pillow, striving to shield her parents from her distress. She couldn't shake the agonizing thought of her college aspirations dissolving due to this one wretched misunderstanding. The court date arrived with alarming speed. Her parents retained a modest local attorney who appeared barely engaged with her account. He assured her these matters typically resolve themselves. Just remain composed and polite. Walking into the Maricopa County Courthouse, Ariel willed herself to keep her head held high, determined not to surrender to the encroaching fear. She wore her finest church attire, clutching her folder containing impeccable report cards and character references like a shield. She was yet unaware that none of it would hold any sway. At the front of the courtroom presided Judge Constance Weller, a woman with sharply defined cheekbones and an even more piercing gaze. The instant Ariel's name was announced, she sensed a palpable drop in the room's temperature. The judge barely glanced at her when she entered her not guilty plea. Instead, Judge Weller reclined in her chair, her eyes perusing the arrest report with an expression oscillating between indifference and annoyance. She posed no questions. She didn't request the store surveillance footage Ariel's attorney had mentioned existed, footage that would have unequivocally exonerated her. Instead, she swiftly declared that the evidence supported probable cause for a felony charge and scheduled a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. Felony. The word echoed in Ariel's ears like an inescapable alarm. Her entire existence, her scholarships, her standing, everything she had diligently worked for teetered on the precipice of a falsehood. She yearned to scream, to demand that anyone actually heed her words. But she knew better. She sank into her seat quietly, tears stinging behind her eyes, contemplating intensely who she could contact. Someone powerful enough to effect change. Someone who would genuinely believe her. And she thought of her brother. Yet Ariel understood that reaching out to Roman was no trivial step. It meant launching a grenade into a courtroom that already seemed intent on making her disappear. The subsequent hearing arrived faster than Ariel could fully absorb. 2 weeks dissolved into a blur of restless nights and incessant anxiety. Food lost its appeal. She barely spoke to her parents, fearing each conversation would spiral into panic. When the morning finally dawned, Ariel sat stiffly in the back seat of her father's car, gazing out the window as they drove towards the Maricopa County Courthouse. Her mother kept stealing worried glances through the rearview mirror, murmuring prayers beneath her breath. Ariel clung to her brother Roman's words from the previous night. "Stay calm. I'm monitoring everything from DC. If it escalates, I'll intervene." But Ariel had no conception of just how dire things were about to become. Inside courtroom 2B, she sat rigidly beside her lawyer, Mr. Halverson, a man who reminded her of a weary substitute teacher. He had promised to request the store footage that day, to present her character letters to champion her cause. Judge Weller entered, her black robes swirling dramatically. She offered no smile, barely surveying the room, simply calling the docket in a sharp, clipped tone, processing cases like items on a checklist. Ariel Porter, case number 5739. Ariel rose, her knees unsteady. Mr. Halverson cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the defense requests to submit video footage from Discount City demonstrating that Miss Porter did not commit any theft, and moves for immediate dismissal of charges." Judge Weller didn't permit him to finish. She cut in sharply. "The motion is denied. This court finds sufficient cause based on the police report. We will proceed to trial." Ariel's heart pounded against her ribs. She looked at Mr. Halverson, anticipating an objection, a statement, anything. But he merely mumbled, "Noted," and resumed his seat. Ariel attempted to speak, to assert herself, but the judge's gavel slammed down once, forcefully. "This is not a discussion, Miss Porter." Behind her, her parents sat frozen. Her mother's hand was clamped over her mouth. Her father's fists were tightly balled against his knees. Judge Weller then turned to the prosecutor, a young woman with a slightly self-satisfied smile. "Do you wish to amend the charges?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor responded, flipping a page in her folder. "Based on new information, the state is elevating to felony grand theft." Gasps rippled from the rear of the courtroom. Ariel's lawyer jolted upright. "Grand theft? That's preposterous. The value of the merchandise." "Enough," Judge Weller barked. "We'll let a jury decide." Ariel remained standing, her mouth parched, her mind reeling. She felt herself sinking under the sheer weight of the courtroom's indifference. Her innocence was irrelevant. The store manager's lack of concrete proof was immaterial. To them she was already condemned. Judge Weller ordered her to return in 3 weeks for the pretrial conference. Cash bail was stipulated at $5,000. Ariel's parents could scarcely afford it. She watched her father bury his face in his hands while her mother frantically whispered about loans and depleted savings. And Judge Weller didn't flinch. She was already moving on to the next case. Exiting the courtroom, Ariel felt diminished, smaller than she ever had in her life. In the hallway, Mr. Halverson mumbled some platitude about filing an appeal and working something out. But Ariel wasn't truly hearing him anymore. Her brother's voice echoed in her mind again. "If it escalates, I'll intervene." It had escalated. It was worse than bad. Her hands trembled as she withdrew her phone and sent a single text message. "Roman. It's happening. I need you." She didn't even have time to find a seat before her phone illuminated with his reply. "Stay put. Don't sign anything. I'm making some calls." She slid the phone back into her purse and leaned against the cold wall, feeling the oppressive weight of the courthouse pressing in from all sides. Around her, strangers went about their business as if nothing significant had occurred. Lawyers chuckled together, clutching coffee cups. Security guards discussed weekend plans. No one saw her. No one seemed to care. But one person did. And he possessed the ability to compel them all to listen. Ariel didn't grasp it yet, but when Roman set things in motion, the ground would begin to tremble beneath everyone's feet. Roman Porter wasn't the type of man who needed to resort to threats. His name alone carried sufficient gravitas. By the time Ariel's text reached him from the courthouse bench, Roman was already pacing his office in Washington, D.C., tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, face set like granite. His sister's plea wasn't a request. It was a flare fired into the night sky, and Roman knew he had no alternative but to respond instantly. He didn't bother with secretaries or scheduling staff. Roman seized his personal phone and contacted his oldest friend in Phoenix, Assistant U.S. Attorney Caleb Rock, who answered on the second ring. "Caleb, I need you in Tempe right now. There's a judge down there railroading my sister. I want eyes on her courtroom before the hour is out." Caleb, sharp and fiercely loyal, didn't ask for explanations. "I'm on it." Roman didn't hang up yet. "And Caleb, dig up everything you can on Judge Constance Weller. Every ruling, every censure, every complaint that got buried." When Roman terminated the call, he stared out his window at the Capitol dome. He understood this wouldn't simply be a case of securing Ariel's release. If her account was truthful, and he harbored no doubt that it was, then something considerably more sinister was unfolding in that courthouse. Meanwhile, back in Tempe, Ariel sat with her parents in the courthouse cafeteria. Their food remained untouched. Her mother clutched a plastic cup of water as if it might shatter if she moved incorrectly. Ariel's father spoke first, his voice low and tinged with despair. "We'll navigate this. I'll call in favors. We'll..." Before he could finish, Ariel's phone buzzed again. "Is the judge still there?" She quickly typed back, "Yes." Hearing a different case now. Roman wasted no time. "Stay put. Instruct your lawyer to do nothing without contacting me first. I'm dispatching someone." Ariel displayed the message to Mr. Halverson, who frowned but nodded stiffly. Whatever his reservations about receiving directives from the U.S. Attorney General's office, he dared not voice them. 20 minutes later, a tall man in a navy suit entered the cafeteria. Sharp haircut, serious eyes. He scanned the room once, located Ariel, and walked directly over. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice steady and professional. "Yes." He flashed a badge so quickly it was barely perceptible. "Caleb Rock. Roman sent me." Relief surged through Ariel's chest so profoundly it nearly stole her breath. Caleb sat down without awaiting an invitation. "Tell me precisely what occurred. Don't omit any details." Ariel launched into the narrative. The backpack, the false accusation, the arrest, Judge Weller's obstinate refusal to review the footage. Caleb took rapid notes, barely blinking. Her parents interjected details, their voices thick with a mixture of anger and fear. When Ariel concluded, Caleb leaned back and tapped his pen against his notepad. "All right, here's the course of action. Roman is compiling Judge Weller's record as we speak. Simultaneously, I'm filing an emergency motion demanding the surveillance footage be submitted prior to trial. That should afford us some crucial time." Ariel swallowed hard. What if it fails? Caleb met her gaze, offering a look that was somehow both gentle and resolute. "It won't fail. We are not abandoning you out here on your own." Ariel had spent days feeling utterly invisible, but sitting there witnessing Caleb mobilizing on her behalf, she felt a spark ignite within her, a tenacious little flame refusing to be extinguished. As they spoke, Caleb's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and smiled thinly. "Roman's quicker than I anticipated. Judge Weller has a history." "What kind of history?" Ariel's mom inquired. Caleb stood, buttoning his jacket. "The kind that's about to make headlines." He instructed them to remain nearby and pledged to return swiftly. As he disappeared down the hall, Ariel leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. Maybe, just maybe, the system didn't hold all the power after all. But a part of her knew that individuals like Judge Weller didn't surrender quietly. However, Ariel couldn't possibly fathom the lengths Judge Weller was prepared to go to keep her secrets concealed. Roman didn't just unearth trivial dirt on Judge Weller. He discovered an entire buried garden of misconduct. Within an hour, his staff had unearthed 3 prior complaints from minority defendants alleging Weller's refusal to admit vital evidence or the issuance of disproportionately harsh sentences without justification. None of these cases had ever advanced beyond the complaint stage, effectively interred beneath mountains of legal technicalities. Roman stared at the files, anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. Patterns this overt weren't accidental. They were deliberate choices. Back in Tempe, Caleb Rock moved with equal dispatch. Armed with the emergency motion, he strode into the clerk's office and insisted on an expedited hearing. Initially, the clerk, A woman named Denise who seemed perpetually burdened by worry hesitated. Judges loathed surprises, particularly those that threatened to expose past rulings to scrutiny. But Caleb wasn't making a request. He leaned in close and spoke softly enough that only Denise could hear. This transcends being merely a case now. It's federal. If you obstruct, you're complicit. She swallowed hard, nodded, and vanished behind a set of heavy oak doors. 10 minutes later, Ariel, her parents, and Mr. Halverson were summoned into an impromptu hearing. Judge Weller sat elevated behind her bench, her lips tightly pursed as if detecting an unpleasant odor. Caleb entered, sharp and undaunted. He neither bowed nor stammered. He didn't even offer a smile. Your Honor, the defense respectfully requests a court order to immediately obtain and review the Discount City surveillance footage from the date of Miss Porter's alleged offense. Judge Weller narrowed her eyes. You are not her attorney of record. I am present on behalf of the U.S. Attorney General's office, Caleb stated smoothly. Roman Porter. The judge stiffened. The mere mention of the name shifted the atmosphere in the room. Weller adjusted her robe, buying time. The motion is denied. This court has already ruled on the relevance of that footage. Caleb stepped forward, his voice calm but incisive. Then the defense moves to enter into evidence records of past complaints against this court regarding selective enforcement and suppression of exculpatory evidence, Your Honor. A profound silence enveloped the room. Even the court reporter paused her typing for a fleeting second. Judge Weller's face acquired a perilous shade of crimson. This is highly irregular. And yet, Caleb countered, his voice like tempered steel, here we are. Ariel found it difficult to breathe. She gripped the edge of the bench so tightly her fingers ached. Judge Weller slammed her gavel down once. Motion under review. Court is adjourned until further notice. She rose so abruptly her chair nearly toppled. Without another word, she retreated into her chambers. Outside, Ariel turned to Caleb, whispering, Is that it? Did we prevail? Caleb shook his head. Not yet. But we've rattled her. He pulled out his phone and immediately dialed Roman. She's rattled. I say we press the advantage now before she can regroup. Roman didn't hesitate. I'm coming there myself. 2 hours later, a black SUV idled outside the courthouse. Roman Porter emerged, clad not in a tailored Washington suit, but in jeans and a leather jacket, like a man prepared for a confrontation. The courthouse buzzed, staffers whispered, attorneys craned their necks. Roman didn't pause to greet anyone. He walked directly up the marble steps and into the heart of the building, moving with an air of undeniable authority. Inside, Judge Weller had secluded herself in her chambers, ostensibly reviewing motions. Roman paid this no mind. He drew the clerk aside. This is no longer a state matter. It's federal now. He presented Denise with a sealed letter, signed by the Deputy Attorney General, announcing a full federal investigation into courtroom practices during Judge Weller's tenure. By the close of the afternoon, the Department of Justice's Internal Affairs Division had already commenced a meticulous review of every case Weller had overseen in the preceding 5 years. Ariel stood in the hallway, stunned as news reporters began to arrive, cameras flashing, microphones extending toward anyone willing to speak. Roman finally approached her, his voice low, intended only for her. You did the right thing, Ari. You called when it mattered. She blinked hard, fighting back tears. But what happens now? Roman offered a slight smile, one that didn't quite reach his weary eyes. Now, he said, now we demonstrate to them they cannot bury people like you any longer. But Roman understood this transcended merely safeguarding Ariel's future. It was about exposing the entirety of what Judge Weller had spent her career laboring to conceal. The following morning, the courthouse presented a transformed appearance. News vans lined the street. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk, thrusting microphones at anyone who appeared remotely connected. Court clerks hurried through side doors. Prosecutors shielded their faces. Even the bailiffs seemed jumpy, their hands hovering near their radios. Inside, Judge Weller had convened an emergency hearing, attempting to reassert control before the impending storm fully broke. She sat taller in her chair now, her voice honed to a razor's edge. But the assembly was no longer solely hers. Roman Porter stood in the gallery, arms crossed, face inscrutable. Caleb sat beside Ariel and her family at the defense table, holding a thick file filled with damning evidence. When Judge Weller entered, she barely spared Roman a glance, pretending he wasn't present. She cleared her throat. This court will proceed with the preliminary hearing in Case 5739, the State of Arizona versus Ariel Porter, she stated stiffly. But before she could continue, Caleb rose to his feet. Your Honor, the defense moves for immediate dismissal based on newly uncovered evidence of systemic judicial misconduct. We possess 32 filed complaints, sealed settlements, and a clear pattern of constitutional violations under your courtroom. The judge's face twitched almost imperceptibly. This is irrelevant to the case at hand, she snapped. Roman then stepped forward, deliberately contravening courtroom protocol. His voice filled the chamber without him even needing to raise it. Avec tout le respect que votre honorabilité me right quand al and grit dun ju gesten question, rein d'autre any put proc eater. With all due respect to your honorability, when the integrity of a judge is in question, nothing else can proceed. Reporters scribbled frantically. A few even whispered into microphones. Judge Weller gripped her gavel tightly but did not bring it down. She recognized that any action she took now would only exacerbate the situation. The prosecutor, looking as though she wished the floor would swallow her, mumbled something about requiring time to review the defense's filings. Caleb pressed the point. There's nothing to review. It's concluded. A heavy silence descended upon the room. Finally, Judge Weller exhaled through her nose, a long, slow hiss. Charges dismissed. Without prejudice, she muttered, the words seemingly catching in her throat. The courtroom erupted not with cheers, but with a buzz of stunned conversation. People leaned towards each other, whispering furiously. Ariel could scarcely believe it. It felt as though 100-pound weight had been lifted from her chest. She turned to Roman, who offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod. No overt celebration, just quiet acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, the true battle commenced. Roman stepped in front of the cameras, addressing the nation directly. My sister's narrative is not unique. It is the narrative of every young person who has been silenced, disregarded, or railroaded by a system that was ostensibly designed to protect them. We are not concluding with this single case. We are initiating a comprehensive cleansing. He announced a full federal probe into judicial misconduct across Maricopa County, a bombshell that sent political shockwaves reverberating throughout Arizona overnight. By noon, Judge Weller's name was a trending topic nationwide. Reporters unearthed every questionable detail. Dubious donations, shady real estate transactions, suspicious affiliations with private prison contractors. The woman who had once sat in judgment over others now found herself drowning in scrutiny. Ariel remained largely out of the spotlight during this period. She didn't seek attention. She didn't crave vengeance. She simply desired her life back. Yet, as she walked out of the courthouse that day, her head held high. Something fundamental within her had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer simply a kid. Roman squeezed her shoulder as they reached the parking lot. You handled it well, kid. Ariel smiled faintly. I didn't really do anything. You stood up, Roman said. Sometimes that's the most challenging thing there is. That night back home, Ariel lay in bed, gazing at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that the future she had envisioned was still within reach. She wasn't naive anymore. She understood the system was flawed. She knew it wouldn't be rectified overnight. But she also grasped something else. Something Judge Weller had tried so desperately to make her forget. Her voice mattered. Her life mattered. ETL en allait pas laisser quiconque prenne /ca de l'ad nouveau. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that from her again. But even as Ariel began to heal, the fallout from Judge Weller's downfall was just starting to ripple outwards, shaking the judicial system to its core. The subsequent weeks were tumultuous. Judge Constance Weller resigned under duress, just 9 days after Ariel's charges were dropped. She didn't depart quietly. At her resignation press conference, she asserted she was the victim of political persecution and hinted at conspiracies she couldn't substantiate. But no one was convinced. The evidence Caleb and Roman had exposed was too compelling, too damning to disregard. Over 30 cases Weller had overseen were reopened. 10 defendants who had accepted plea deals they didn't fully comprehend were released. 2 others had already served time for offenses they likely hadn't committed. The Department of Justice deployed investigators to meticulously examine courtrooms throughout Maricopa County. What they unearthed wasn't merely the actions of a single corrupt judge. It was a system predicated on haste and silence, where young Black and Latino defendants were processed rapidly through the machinery while others received mere reprimands. Local news outlets ran nightly segments detailing the scandal. Families came forward with narratives mirroring Ariel's. Wrongful charges, ignored evidence, public defenders who barely knew their clients' names. The mayor of Tempe issued a public apology. The governor pledged sweeping judicial reforms. New training programs were mandated. Archaic policies were discarded. And everywhere Ariel went, the grocery store, the library, the park, strangers would stop her, express their gratitude, embrace her. Some simply stood there, tears in their eyes, unable to articulate their feelings. Initially, Ariel was unsure how to respond. She wasn't accustomed to being seen, to being a symbol of anything. But gradually she recognized she didn't need to be flawless. She simply needed to be authentic. She began speaking at schools, first in Tempe then in neighboring cities. She recounted what had transpired, not to instill fear, but to provide a cautionary tale, to underscore that knowing your rights, utilizing your voice, and refusing to be invisible held more significance than anyone had ever conveyed to them. She didn't sugarcoat the reality. She spoke of how swiftly everything could unravel, how effortlessly someone's error or prejudice could demolish your future. But she also shared how a single voice could make the earth tremble. Roman remained in Arizona for a few weeks beyond his initial plan. He quietly established a foundation dedicated to assisting students facing legal battles secure competent legal representation. No fanfare, no press releases, just tangible action. Back home, life slowly began to reassemble itself. Ariel's parents no longer flinched whenever the phone rang. They started laughing again. Her mother took up painting. Her father purchased a second-hand guitar and taught himself to play. And Ariel, she received her UCLA acceptance letter reconfirmed, accompanied by a new scholarship, one that explicitly cited her activism as a qualification. When she boarded the plane for Los Angeles that autumn, she carried only 2 bags. One containing her belongings, the other filled with every letter, note and card she had received from individuals who claimed her story had inspired hope in them. She sat by the window, gazing out at the clouds, experiencing a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. Not because everything was flawlessly resolved, not because justice had miraculously materialized, but because she had endured. She had stood her ground when every force surrounding her had attempted to suppress her. And she wasn't finished yet. Roman called just before her flight departed. He answered smiling. "Proud of me," she teased. Roman chuckled. "Kid, you're just getting started." She laughed and promised to call upon landing. As she ended the call, the flight attendant delivered final instructions, and the engines roared to life. Ariel closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, and allowed herself to believe that the next chapter would be entirely hers to author. No judge, no system, no single mistake defining her narrative. But before Ariel could fully move forward, there remained one final conversation she felt compelled to have, one that would stay with her forever. 2 days before classes commenced at UCLA, Ariel found herself seated on a bench overlooking Santa Monica Beach. The sun was descending, painting the sky in vibrant, sweeping strokes of orange and purple. Families laughed nearby, surfers lugged boards across the sand, and vendors called out, hawking ice cream and trinkets. It should have been idyllic. It almost was. But Ariel felt a persistent tug, a lingering piece of unfinished business. She dialed a number she hadn't called since the day the charges were dropped. To her surprise, Judge Weller answered. There was a pause, extended and awkward, as if neither knew who should speak first. Finally, Ariel broke the silence. "I don't understand why you did what you did. Maybe you believed you were safeguarding something. Maybe you simply failed to see me at all." The judge said nothing, merely listened. Ariel's voice remained steady. "I'm not calling to berate you. I'm not calling to forgive you either. I'm calling to tell you, you lost." Another lengthy pause. Then Weller spoke, her voice rough like gravel. "You don't comprehend how things operate." Ariel almost laughed, but there was no trace of humor in the thought. "I comprehend enough. I comprehend that when people remain silent, the wrong things continue to happen. Weller sighed into the phone, a sound that somehow conveyed both resignation and stubbornness. The world isn't just girl. It never has been. Ariel rose from the bench, tucking the phone more securely against her ear as she strolled towards the water. Perhaps not, she said softly. But I'm not going to exist in the one you attempted to imprison me within. She didn't await a response. She ended the call and slipped the phone into her pocket, the ocean breeze whipping her hair across her face. That conversation lingered with her, not due to the words exchanged, but because of their underlying significance. Some individuals would never change. Some systems would fiercely resist alteration, clinging stubbornly to their brokenness. But change didn't require permission. It didn't require an invitation. It required individuals willing to be vocal, willing to be persistent, willing to be visible, even when the world wished to avert its gaze. Ariel smiled as she kicked off her shoes and allowed the cool water to lap against her feet. Her story was no longer solely hers. It belonged to every young person who had ever been doubted, every parent who had ever prayed for a reprieve, every voice that had been silenced and dared to speak regardless. She wasn't naive enough to believe her struggle was over. She knew it was just commencing. But standing there barefoot in the Pacific, she also knew this. She was no longer solitary. And neither was anyone else willing to take a stand. Call to action. If Ariel's story resonated with you, if it prompted you to consider the silent struggles unfolding around us, do not remain silent. Share this account. Speak out when you witness injustice. Be the voice someone else might desperately need to hear. And if you want more real human stories that matter, subscribe and stay with us, because sometimes the only thing stronger than fear is truth.